Number 50 through 40 all have something in common. They happened under one of history's most evil regimes, and they directly led to the first major international law on human experimentation. Starting at number 50, the hypothermia experiments. Nazi doctor Sigmund Rascher, and yes, I checked, no relation to the character from Breaking Bad, decided the best way to help German pilots survive cold water crashes was to throw concentration camp prisoners into ice water and watch them die. Sophisticated scientific method, right? Between 1941 and 1945, around 300 victims were subjected to these experiments at Dachau. About 90 of them died. The survivors suffered hypothermia so severe their organs shut down. The twisted part? Some of this data is still controversial in medical circles because using it might actually save lives, but it came from literal torture. Number 49. High-altitude experiments. Not satisfied with freezing people to death, Rascher also wanted to know what happens when you expose humans to high-altitude conditions. So he put prisoners in low-pressure chambers and simulated altitudes up to 68,000 feet. Their lungs ruptured, their eardrums exploded. They screamed until they couldn't anymore. About 200 prisoners were subjected to this between 1942 and 1945. Around 80 died during the experiments. The rest? Well, let's just say they didn't get workman's comp. The defense at the Nuremberg trials? We were just following orders. Spoiler alert, that didn't work. Number 48, malaria experiments. Because apparently giving people malaria on purpose seemed like a great idea to Nazi doctors. Over 1,000 prisoners were deliberately infected with malaria to test experimental treatments. Here's the kicker. They'd infect people with malaria, then either give them experimental drugs or just watch. Like the world's most evil reality show. Half of the victims died and the rest were left with permanent damage. But don't worry, I'm sure the doctors faced severe consequences. Sarcastic beat? Oh wait, many of them went on to have successful medical careers after the war. Fantastic. Number 47. The sulfonamide experiments. Nazi doctors wanted to test new antibiotics, so they deliberately wounded prisoners, infected the wounds with bacteria, then rubbed wood shavings and glass into them to simulate combat injuries. 60 prisoners were subjected to this barbarism. About a third died from the infections. The survivors were left with permanent disabilities, chronic pain, and probably trust issues with anyone wearing a lab coat. Number 46. Bone, muscle, and nerve experiments. Karl Gebhardt, another name for the worst humans ever list, decided to test bone transplantation by removing sections of bone from healthy prisoners without anesthesia. He'd also remove entire muscles and nerves just to see what would happen. What happened was agony, permanent disability, and death. Revolutionary science there, Karl. Really pushing the boundaries of sadism masquerading as medicine. Number 45. Seawater experiments. Hans Eppinger decided to solve the problem of stranded sailors by forcing prisoners to drink only seawater for weeks. Turns out, and this will shock you, drinking only salt water causes severe dehydration, kidney failure, and death. Who could have predicted that? Oh right, literally anyone who's ever been to the ocean. Prisoners experienced excruciating pain, hallucinations, and madness. Several died. Eppinger himself committed suicide before his trial. I'd say that's karma, but the real karma would have been making him drink seawater for a few weeks first. Numbers 44 through 40. Mass sterilization experiments. Multiple Nazi doctors, including Karl Klauberg and Horst Schumann, developed methods for mass sterilization because eugenics was apparently their favorite hobby. They used surgical procedures, x-rays, and injections of caustic substances directly into women's reproductive organs, often without anesthesia. Thousands of prisoners, predominantly women, were sterilized. Many died from infections or complications. The survivors suffered permanent pain and psychological trauma. The goal? To be able to sterilize millions of undesirables efficiently. And yes, this is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. Now, you're probably wondering, how did the world respond to all of this? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. But first, we need to talk about what the Americans were doing during this same period. Because, plot twist, we weren't exactly saints either. But before we get there, drop a comment below. What punishment do you think would be appropriate for scientists who conduct experiments like these? I'm genuinely curious what you all think. Alright, so while we were prosecuting Nazis at Nuremberg, the United States was conducting its own series of experiments that would make Joseph Mengele slow clap. Let's count down numbers 39 through 25. Number 39, and possibly the most infamous American experiment, the Tuskegee syphilis study. Between 1932 and 1972, yes, 1972, not 1872, the U.S. Public Health Service recruited 600 black men from Alabama, telling them they were receiving free health care. Plot twist, 399 of them had syphilis, and instead of treating them, researchers just watched for 40 years. Even after penicillin became the standard treatment in 1947, they deliberately withheld it to see what would happen. What happened was, 128 men died from syphilis or related complications. 40 wives were infected. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. The study only ended when a whistleblower leaked it to the press in 1972. The last survivor received a settlement and an apology from President Clinton in 1997. Just a quick 25-year wait for acknowledgement. No big deal. Number 38, the plutonium injection experiments. Between 1945 and 1947, Manhattan Project scientists injected 18 patients with plutonium without their knowledge or consent. These weren't consenting military volunteers, they were hospital patients who had no idea they were being turned into human radiation detectors. Some were terminally ill, but several were expected to live for years. The goal? To determine plutonium's effects on the human body. The result? Cancer, organ damage, and decades of government cover-up. The experiments weren't even declassified until 1993. 48 years. That's how long it took for the government to admit, yeah, we injected people with plutonium without telling them. Great transparency, guys. Number 37. The Fernald State School experiments. MIT and Quaker Oats, yes, the oatmeal company, teamed up to feed radioactive materials to mentally disabled children at the Fernald State School in Massachusetts. They told the kids they were joining a science club. How fun! The science involved feeding them breakfast cereal laced with radioactive tracers. 73 children were fed radioactive materials between 1946 and 1953. The kids were told they were helping science. What they were actually doing was becoming walking radiation experiments. The study wasn't revealed until 1993. The victims received settlements in 1998. Quaker Oats' slogan should have been, "It's the right thing to do," after we get caught. Number 36. Project 4.1, also known as Let's Nuke Some Islands and See What Happens to the People. In 1954, the U.S. detonated the Castle Bravo nuclear bomb in the Marshall Islands, the most powerful nuclear device the U.S. ever detonated. The blast was 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The government evacuated some islands but deliberately left others to study radiation effects on humans. For decades, they monitored the islanders' cancer rates, birth defects, and thyroid conditions without providing adequate medical care. This wasn't classified as an experiment officially, but Project 4.1's documents reveal they studied the human effects systematically. The U.S. government eventually admitted wrongdoing in 2000 and established a compensation fund. Only took 46 years. Number 35. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study. At Stateville Prison in Illinois, over 400 inmates were deliberately infected with malaria to test experimental treatments. Now, unlike the Nazi experiments, these prisoners technically volunteered, and by volunteered, I mean they were offered early parole reviews and a bit of extra cash. You know, coercive incentives that definitely make everything ethical. The study ran from 1944 to 1963. Participants suffered high fevers, organ damage, and in some cases, death. The doctor running the show? Alf Alving, who later had a laboratory named after him. Because nothing says, honor this man like giving you malaria. Number 34. MK Ultra, or as I like to call it, the CIA's two-decade LSD party gone wrong. From 1953 to 1973, the CIA conducted mind control experiments on unwitting subjects. They dosed people with LSD, subjected them to sensory deprivation, used electroshock therapy, and employed verbal and sexual abuse, all in the name of finding the perfect truth serum. They tested on prisoners, mental patients, prostitutes' clients, and even their own agents. At least 130 programs were conducted at 80 institutions. One scientist, Frank Olson, was secretly dosed with LSD, then died after falling from a window 9 days later. Ruled a suicide. His family says murder. The truth? Probably lost in a drugged-out haze somewhere. MK Ultra was only exposed in 1975 during the Church Committee hearings. Most records were destroyed by CIA Director Richard Helms in 1973. Nothing suspicious about that. Number 33. The Holmesburg Prison Experiments. Dr. Albert Kligman, dermatologist and apparent sociopath, conducted experiments on prisoners at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia for over 2 decades. He tested chemical weapons, dioxin, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics on inmates. Some prisoners were exposed to Agent Orange, others had chemicals injected under their skin to see what would happen. Spoiler: pain, permanent scarring, and cancer. Kligman's own quote, "All I saw before me were acres of skin." Acres of skin. He literally saw prisoners as human skin farms. The experiments weren't fully exposed until the 1990s. Kligman faced no criminal charges and continued practicing medicine until his death in 2010. He lived to 93. There is no justice. Number 32. The Guatemala Syphilis Experiments. Apparently, Tuskegee wasn't enough, so in 1946, the U.S. Public Health Service decided to go international. They deliberately infected over 1,500 Guatemalan prisoners, sex workers, mental patients, and soldiers with syphilis and gonorrhea, without consent. Some subjects were infected through sex with infected prostitutes. Others were directly inoculated. At least 83 people died. The experiments were hidden for 64 years until historian Susan Reverby discovered them in 2010. President Obama apologized to Guatemala in 2010. The victims' families filed lawsuits, but in 2012, a U.S. judge dismissed them, ruling the government couldn't be sued. So we apologized, but also said, you can't do anything about it. Very classy. Number 31. The Willowbrook Hepatitis Studies. Dr. Saul Krugman deliberately infected mentally disabled children with hepatitis at the Willowbrook State School in New York. Parents were told their children would only be admitted to the overcrowded facility if they consented to the study. So, coercion disguised as choice. About 700 children were infected with hepatitis over 14 years. The study ended in 1970 after public outcry, but Krugman defended his work for decades, claiming it led to vaccine development. Cool motive, still child abuse. Numbers 30 through 25 all involve radiation experiments conducted across the United States from the 1940s through the 1970s. Let me rapid-fire these nightmares. Number 30. Oregon and Washington state prisoners had their testicles irradiated to study radiation effects on fertility. 130 men participated, many developed cancer. Number 29. Pregnant women were given radioactive cocktails at Vanderbilt University to study fetal development. Over 800 women, multiple miscarriages, and infant deaths. Number 28. Children with developmental disabilities were fed radioactive milk at the Sonoma State Home in California in the 1950s. Number 27. Total body irradiation experiments at the University of Cincinnati exposed cancer patients to whole-body radiation, many of whom were poor and black, from 1960 to 1972. About 90 patients, at least 20 died within 60 days. Number 26. The University of Rochester injected 11 patients with uranium in the 1940s to study kidney damage. None consented or were informed. Number 25. At the Massachusetts General Hospital, researchers injected cancer patients with uranium and plutonium in the 1950s without consent. I'm grouping these together because individually they're horrifying, but collectively they represent a systemic American willingness to treat vulnerable people as lab equipment. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely this led to some serious laws, right? Tell me we have protections now. We do, but here's the thing. Those laws came way later than you'd think, and they're not as strong as you'd hope. But before we get into the legal stuff, we need to talk about what happened in the rest of the world, because America and Germany weren't the only players in this horror show. Drop a comment. Which of these experiments shocked you the most so far? Because we're only halfway through this list. Numbers 24 through 10 take us around the world, from Japan to the UK, from Canada to South Korea. Turns out disregarding human dignity is a truly international sport. Number 24. Unit 731. If you thought the Nazis were bad, meet Japan's biological warfare unit during World War II. Led by Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 conducted experiments on an estimated 3,000 to 250,000 people. Mostly Chinese prisoners, but also Koreans, Soviets, and others. What did they do? Vivisection without anesthesia. Frostbite testing by freezing limbs, then thawing them with various methods. Weaponized plague, anthrax, and cholera testing on living subjects. Pressure chamber experiments. Forced pregnancy followed by vivisection to study fetal development. Here's the worst part. After the war, the US granted immunity to Unit 731 members in exchange for their research data. Ishii lived until 1959 and died of throat cancer, a natural death he absolutely didn't deserve. Number 23. North Korean prison camp experiments. According to defector testimonies, North Korea has conducted chemical and biological weapons experiments on political prisoners since the 1950s. Former guards describe families being gassed in chambers to test chemical weapons, prisoners being used to test toxins and infectious diseases. These accounts are difficult to verify due to North Korea's secrecy, but testimony from multiple defectors over decades paints a consistent picture. The most recent defector testimony was from 2023. That's right, this might still be happening. But international accountability? Zero. Because apparently we've decided some atrocities are too geopolitically complicated to address. Number 22. The Soviet Poison Laboratory, or Laboratory 12, where the USSR tested poisons on prisoners to develop undetectable assassination methods. From the 1920s through the 1950s, prisoners were given various poisons disguised in food or drink. Scientists measured time to death, symptoms, and detectability. Subjects included political prisoners and enemies of the state. The laboratory operated in secret until Soviet defectors revealed its existence during the Cold War. No one was ever prosecuted. Many of the scientists continued their careers. Number 21. Porton Down experiments. Britain's military research facility tested chemical weapons on over 20,000 servicemen between the 1940s and 1989. Servicemen were told they were helping develop cold cures. Instead, they were exposed to nerve agents like sarin, mustard gas, and LSD. At least one serviceman, Ronald Madison, died in 1953 after sarin exposure. The experiments weren't fully acknowledged until 2006. An inquest ruled Madison's death unlawful killing, but no one was prosecuted. The Ministry of Defense settled compensation claims in 2008, 55 years after Madison's death. Number 20. The CIA-funded experiments at McGill University in Montreal. Dr. Ewan Cameron conducted de-patterning experiments on psychiatric patients. Patients were placed in drug-induced comas for weeks, subjected to electroshock therapy at 30 to 40 times normal power, and forced to listen to repeated messages for 16 hours a day. The goal? Erase existing memories and reprogram patients. The results? Permanent amnesia, loss of identity, and complete psychological devastation. Some patients forgot their families, how to use bathrooms, and basic motor skills. The Canadian government apologized and paid settlements in the 1990s. The CIA never formally acknowledged its role. Number 19. Apartheid South Africa's military aversion therapy for homosexuality. During apartheid, the South African Defense Force subjected suspected homosexual soldiers to chemical castration, electroshock therapy, and even gender reassignment surgery, without consent. Estimated victims: up to 1,000 soldiers between the 1970s and 1990s. Some were driven to suicide. Others suffered permanent psychological and physical damage. The head of the program, Dr. Aubrey Levin, fled to Canada in 1995, where he continued practicing, until he was arrested in 2010 for sexually assaulting patients. He was convicted in 2013. Finally, an actual arrest. It only took about 30 years. Numbers 18 through 15 involve psychiatric experiments that destroyed minds in the name of healing. Number 18. Insulin shock therapy, where patients were repeatedly injected with insulin to induce comas, used widely from the 1930s to 1960s. Death rate, about 5%. Effectiveness, basically zero. Number 17. Frontal lobotomies, performed on over 40,000 Americans from the 1930s to 1960s, often without proper consent. The inventor won a Nobel Prize. Thousands were left permanently disabled. Number 16. Walter Freeman's ice pick lobotomies, performed through the eye socket with a tool literally based on an ice pick, often without anesthesia, sometimes in his traveling lobotomobile. At least 3,000 procedures. Number 15. Deep sleep therapy in Australia, where psychiatric patients were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks at Chelmsford Hospital from 1963 to 1964-1979. At least 24 patients died. The Australian government held a royal commission in 1988. The doctor responsible had his license revoked but faced no criminal charges. Number 14. The Monster Study. At the University of Iowa, Wendell Johnson wanted to test his theory about stuttering's cause. So he took 22 orphan children, divided them into groups, and subjected half to positive speech therapy while berating and psychologically abusing the others to induce stuttering. It worked. The abused children developed speech problems, anxiety, and psychological trauma that lasted their entire lives. The study was hidden for decades. It was only publicly revealed in 2001. The University of Iowa apologized in 2001 and paid settlements in 2007. Johnson, the researcher, had died in 1965, escaping all consequences. Numbers 13 through 10 involve pharmaceutical companies using vulnerable populations as test subjects. Number 13. Pfizer's Trovon trial in Nigeria in 1996, where they tested an experimental antibiotic on 200 children during a meningitis epidemic without proper consent. 11 children died. Many suffered brain damage. Pfizer settled for $75 million in 2009. Number 12. Clinical trials in India from the 2000s to the 2010s, where pharmaceutical companies conducted drug trials on illiterate populations without informed consent. Estimated deaths, over 3,000. Regulations tightened in 2013 after massive outcry. Number 11, the EPA's human pesticide testing from 2003 to 2006, where they paid subjects, many poor or homeless, to be exposed to pesticides. Halted in 2006 after congressional investigation. Number 10, hepatitis B vaccine trials on mentally disabled children in New York in the 1970s, similar to Willowbrook but lesser known. About 1,000 children involved. Each of these led to policy changes, but only after public exposure. Notice a pattern? Alright, we're in the home stretch. 9 more experiments, and then I'm going to tell you about the laws that finally put some guardrails on this madness. And more importantly, when the last person was actually arrested for breaking these laws. But real talk, are you still with me? Drop a comment if you've made it this far, because these last 9 are going to make everything else look like a warm-up. Let's finish this. Numbers 9 through 1 are going to hurt because several of these happened during your lifetime. Yes, your lifetime. Let's go. Number 9. We're circling back to Dr. Albert Kligman because his villainy deserves a second mention. In the 1960s, Kligman partnered with Dow Chemical to test the effects of dioxin, a component of Agent Orange, on Holmesburg prisoners. The prisoners developed chlorachin, severe skin lesions, and later, cancer. Dow paid Kligman $10,000 for his research. The prisoners got nothing except lifelong health problems. This wasn't fully exposed until 1998. Kligman's defense: everyone was doing it. He never faced criminal charges. Number 8. American forced sterilization programs. Between 1907 and 1981, again 1981, not 1881, over 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized under eugenics laws. Targets included people deemed feeble-minded, the mentally ill, prisoners, and disproportionately, Black and Indigenous people. California alone sterilized about 20,000 people. The last forced sterilization under these programs occurred in Oregon in 1981. California formally apologized in 2003. Several states still have these eugenics laws on the books, though inactive. And before you think this is ancient history, in 2020, a whistleblower revealed that ICE detention centers were performing mass hysterectomies on immigrant women without proper consent. Investigation ongoing. Number 7. The fallout from Tuskegee. When the study was exposed in 1972, it triggered a national reckoning that led to significant reforms, which we'll cover soon. But here's what's messed up. Despite the study ending in 1972, it took until 1997 for President Clinton to formally apologize. 25 years. And the distrust created? It's still here. Studies show the Tuskegee experiment contributes to ongoing medical mistrust in Black communities, affecting healthcare outcomes today. The ripple effects of 40 years of lies are still killing people. Number 6. Henrietta Lacks and HeLa cells. In 1951, doctors at Johns Hopkins took cancer cells from Henrietta Lacks without her knowledge or consent. Those cells became the first immortal human cell line. They're still reproducing today. They've been used in virtually every major medical breakthrough since 1951. Polio vaccine, cancer research, HIV/AIDS research, gene mapping, cloning. Henrietta died in 1951. Her family didn't know about the cells until 1975. They've never received compensation, though billions of dollars have been made from her cells. In 2023, yes, 2023, the National Institutes of Health finally reached an agreement to give the family some control. It only took 72 years. This isn't technically experimentation in the traditional sense, but it's medical exploitation without consent, which is the same ethical violation. Number 5. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Psychology professor Philip Zimbardo wanted to study prison dynamics, so he turned Stanford's basement into a mock prison. He recruited 24 college students, randomly assigned them as guards or prisoners, and watched as things spiraled into psychological abuse within 24 hours. Guards became sadistic. Prisoners had mental breakdowns. Zimbardo let it continue for 6 days before shutting it down, and only because his girlfriend, psychologist Christina Masloch, told him it was unethical. The experiment has been heavily criticized for lack of scientific rigor and for Zimbardo actively encouraging guard brutality. Some participants have described lasting psychological effects. Zimbardo faced no professional consequences and built an entire career on this study until its ethical problems were widely acknowledged in the 2010s. Number 4. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments at Yale. Participants were told they were helping with a learning study, but they were actually being tested on whether they'd administer electric shocks to another person. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They believed they were electrocuting someone potentially to death because an authority figure told them to. Results? About 65% of participants administered what they believed were potentially fatal shocks. Many suffered psychological distress during and after the experiment. The study revealed disturbing truths about human obedience to authority, but it also traumatized participants without proper consent about what they were really studying. Milgram's research led to stricter ethics rules, but he himself faced minimal consequences. Number 3. In 2012, Facebook deliberately manipulated the news feeds of 689,000 users without consent to see if emotions were contagious online. They showed some users more negative content, others more positive content, then measured whether it affected their own posts. Results? Yes, emotional manipulation works. The ethical problem? Facebook didn't get consent, didn't tell users they were experimenting on them, and potentially worsened depression and anxiety for thousands of people. When it was revealed in 2014, Facebook's response was basically, "Oops, our bad." No fines, no criminal charges, just a statement saying they'd be more careful. This is your reminder that you're likely part of multiple experiments right now on social media platforms. You just don't know it. Number 2. The CIA's post-9/11 enhanced interrogation techniques, or as normal people call it, torture. Between 2002 and 2009, the CIA detained and tortured at least 119 people in black sites around the world. Techniques included waterboarding, sleep deprivation for up to 180 hours, stress positions, confinement in boxes, and more. At least 26 detainees were later determined to have been wrongfully detained. Some were tortured to death. Gul Rahman froze to death in a CIA black site in Afghanistan in 2002. The Senate Intelligence Committee released a report in 2014 confirming torture occurred and that it produced no actionable intelligence. Consequences? 0 prosecutions. The CIA personnel involved faced no criminal charges. The psychologists who designed the torture program, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, settled a lawsuit in 2017. No one went to prison for torture in the 21st century. And finally, number 1. The ongoing detention and experimentation on Uyghurs in China. Since 2017, China has detained over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in re-education camps. Survivors report forced sterilization, medical experiments, organ harvesting, and systematic torture. This includes forced medication, forced IUD insertions, and unexplained medical procedures. Credible reports suggest forced organ harvesting from detainees. This is happening right now, today. As you watch this video, the international response? Economic sanctions and strongly worded statements. No military intervention. No ICC prosecutions. Because China's too economically powerful to hold accountable. It's the same story throughout history. Atrocities continue until they become politically convenient to stop. Okay, deep breath. That was a lot. Now let's talk about what humanity finally did to prevent this from happening again. Spoiler, we waited way too long, and the laws we created have some pretty big loopholes. First up, the Nuremberg Code, established in 1947 after the Nazi doctors' trials. This was the first international document establishing ethical principles for human experimentation. It mandated voluntary, informed consent is absolutely essential. Experiments should yield beneficial results. Unnecessary suffering should be avoided. No experiment where death or disabling injury is expected. Sounds basic, right? But here's the problem. The Nuremberg Code wasn't legally binding, it was a moral guideline. And as we've seen from the American experiments that happened after 1947, moral guidelines are just suggestions when there's scientific progress to be made. Next, the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, created by the World Medical Association. This expanded on Nuremberg, adding independent ethical review requirements, special protections for vulnerable populations, requirement that interests of subjects must always prevail over science. Again, not legally binding, just strongly recommended ethical principles that countries could ignore if inconvenient. The Belmont Report in 1979 was America's response to Tuskegee being exposed. It established 3 core principles: respect for persons, beneficence, justice. More importantly, it led to the creation of institutional review boards, IRBs, which must approve all research on human subjects at institutions receiving federal funding. This was the first time the US had enforceable regulations. Finally, some teeth. But here's the catch: only applies to federally funded research. Private companies? Not necessarily required to follow these rules. Remember Facebook's experiment? No IRB approval needed because they're a private company. Internationally, we have the Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences Guidelines, the ICH Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, UNESCO's Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, 2005. All of these are great on paper, but enforcement? That's where it gets messy. Most international medical ethics principles aren't enforceable unless individual countries adopt them into law, and even then, prosecution is rare. Which brings us to the question you've been waiting for. When was the last major arrest for unethical human experimentation? The most recent significant case. In 2022, French doctor Didier Raoult faced criminal investigation for conducting unauthorized clinical trials of hydroxychloroquine on COVID-19 patients without proper ethical approval. As of 2024, the case is ongoing. He hasn't been arrested yet. Going back further, in 2013, South African Dr. Aubrey Levin was convicted for sexual assault of patients connected to his apartheid-era conversion therapy experiments and sentenced to 5 years. Before that, most cases result in civil settlements, medical license revocations, or institutional sanctions, not criminal arrests. The Nuremberg doctors' executions in 1947 remain some of the only times experimenters faced capital punishment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people who conduct unethical experiments don't get arrested. They get slaps on the wrist, lose their licenses, or face no consequences at all. So there you have it. 50 evil human experiments that actually happened. From Nazi death camps to American radiation tests. From Japanese biological warfare to modern social media manipulation. From forced sterilizations to ongoing genocide. The pattern is clear. Vulnerable people, prisoners, minorities, children, the mentally ill, the poor, have been treated as expendable in the name of science, military advantage, or profit. The laws we created, Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report, came decades after they were needed, and they're still not strong enough. Here's what's truly terrifying. Medical ethics regulations are only as good as their enforcement, and enforcement requires political will, public awareness, and institutional accountability. Right now, in 2025, there are likely experiments happening that will shock people 50 years from now the same way these shock us. Maybe it's AI testing on populations without consent. Maybe it's genetic experiments in countries with weak regulations. Maybe it's something we haven't even imagined yet. The only thing that stops these atrocities is people like you paying attention, demanding accountability, and refusing to look away when it's uncomfortable. So here's what I want you to do. First, drop a comment below. Which of these experiments shocked you most? What do you think should happen to scientists who conduct experiments like these? Should there be a statute of limitations on medical war crimes? I genuinely want to know what you think. Second, hit that subscribe button. If you made it through all 20 minutes of this, you're the kind of person who doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths. We need more of that. Third, share this video. I know it's heavy, I know it's disturbing, but these stories need to be remembered. The victims deserve to be remembered. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana. Don't let us forget.